Hello, my name is Jamie Carr, and I'm an environmental analyst with MassDCR's Division of Water Supply Protection. Today we're going to talk about road salt, or sodium chloride. So the way that road salt can help us manage snow and ice in the wintertime is a really big help for public safety. However, in the Wachusett watershed alone, up to 18,000 tons of road salt are applied each year. So where does all that salt end up? It actually ends up right here in the reservoir. So once salt is put down on a road, it ends up ultimately in the waterways. We can see it and we can measure it in tributaries to the reservoir, in lakes and ponds, in the reservoir itself, and now even in the groundwater. So salt raises the salinity of water, but it's not good for fresh water and the organisms that are here in the reservoir. Zooplankton are tiny aquatic animals that live in the water. They eat algae, and they have an important role to play in keeping the water clear. It just so happens that zooplankton are one of the more sensitive species and organisms to increases in salinity. They can change the population dynamics of the zooplankton, and that has impacts on the algae and the water clarity. They're also an important part of the food chain. So if you have zooplankton and algae populations change, those are what feed the small fish, the larger fish like lake trout and brook trout, other animals at the higher up in the food chain like bald eagles and loons, and even people. And if you start causing problems in the food chain, then that's a problem for water quality. So how do we know? So how do we measure the changes in the salinity of water? Well, there's a measurement called specific conductivity. So as salt dissolves in water and takes the space in between the water molecules, it becomes better at conducting electricity. So we can use a handheld probe in the water to measure the specific conductance of the water. And it turns out that's a lot easier than collecting a sample and sending it to the lab and measuring the precise amount of chloride in the water. And the two things correlate very well. So we can get the results immediately with the handheld probe. So DWSP measures specific conductance in the reservoir, in tributaries, and in 8 groundwater wells in the watershed. For example, here is a graph of the specific conductance collected at Gates Brook, a direct tributary to Wachusett Reservoir. This is a continuous data set from 1989 to the present day in 2022. You can see that values used to fall under 500 microsiemens per centimeter. Nowadays, we commonly record values over 1,000, and even higher. You can see from the trend line that values have been increasing a lot over time. So we are now seeing evidence that chlorides are creating a long-term problem with the levels that we're seeing in groundwater in particular. So this is important to consider because groundwater is the source of drinking water for a lot of private and municipal wells in the watershed. And ultimately, those chlorides end up in the reservoir, which is the drinking water supply for over 3 million people. Watershed management supplies source water that requires the least amount of treatment. The Massachusetts Water Resources Authority treats water to provide some of the best drinking water in the country. This problem is not unique to the Wachusett watershed. Higher levels of chloride have been documented in fresh water across Massachusetts, the Northeast, and even nationwide, everywhere road salt is used in winter. And that's not the end of the negative impacts either. Road salt can cause the underside of vehicles and equipment to rust more quickly. It can degrade concrete structures. It can cause plants along the roadside to get burned by salt. Water that's high in chloride also promotes corrosion of pipes in the water supply system. So it can make contaminants that are already present in the system come out more easily and enter the drinking water. And it can make it difficult to make a good cup of coffee. So you can think that the salt that's affecting your coffee in the water you used this morning might have been put down on the road 10 years ago. It's very persistent in the environment. So what can we do to keep the amount of salt down? The Division of Water Supply Protection is committed to finding ways to reduce salt use in the Wachusett Reservoir watershed by working with local town Department of Public Works, Mass DOT, and you to come up with creative solutions to the problem of salt contamination. You may have noticed that before a winter storm, you might see trucks on the roadways applying a liquid, making the roads look wet or leaving lines on the road surface. That liquid that's being put down is known as brine, which is a mix of about 23% sodium chloride and 77% water that pre-treats the road, which actually prevents snow and ice from getting stuck to the road surface itself. This method not only keeps roads safe from the start of a weather event, but it also makes snow removal easier. And in the end, it drastically reduces the amount of salt that would be used later in the storm. Check with your town to see if they've already started or are considering using brine to pre-treat roads. Switching to brine has upfront costs in terms of new equipment, but over time can reduce costs and salt use by as much as 30 to 40%. If you do use salt at home, please do so minimally and responsibly. A 12-ounce coffee mug filled with rock salt will treat a 20-foot long driveway. Any more than that won't actually melt snow and ice any faster. Lightly pre-treating an area with rock salt before a storm is the way to go. Just make sure there's space you can see between the grains when you put it down. If there's some left over after the storm, that means you used a little bit too much this time. And if you do have some left over, you can sweep it up and use it for the next storm. That way you're saving salt and saving money. If you're up for it, you can try making your own brine solution at home in a pump sprayer. Videos are all over the internet, and they'll explain how to add straight salt to water to make your own brine. And, if at all possible, stay home during a storm. Don't expect to drive during and immediately after the storm. Give the snow removal crews plenty of time and space to make the roads safer. So while it's necessary to maintain roads in the wintertime to keep them safe for people, if we don't start doing it while using less salt, then we're going to continue to see severe impacts to aquatic life. So using salt in a smarter way, we can save money. We can still maintain public safety, we can protect the environment, and we can preserve our drinking water quality. So salt smarter and not harder. Sometimes ice and snow can be a pain, but in the middle of New England winter, sometimes you just have to appreciate the beauty of it.